Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz here with a poem for you for Poetry Thursday. But I'm doing this with a special reason, which is that I wanted to say something about the Disability Readathon 2022, which is happening in April. And it feels like it's always good to know ahead about these things, so and to plan for them. So the poem I'm going to read is from a collection of poetry that I'm planning to read as a Disability Readathon choice, and I thought I'll read one now so that it gives me a chance to kind of flag it up to anyone who might see it here who hasn't seen it elsewhere. So as a readathon, it's hosted by Erin and Anna. It's month long. It's very lively. They have a lot of activity on social media around it, so not just BookTube but also Twitter and Instagram and so on, and it's very well organized. There are oodles of prompts in different categories, but I think it's one of those readathons where they're not necessarily expecting everyone to try and do everything. It's more that there's like a really nice wide selection of things that might stimulate you into making a good choice or two, and that's what I'm trying to do. So and the essential thing is to read something by a disabled author, because it is about reading disabled writers. Now I'm going to read a poem from the collection Ultimatum Orangutan by Khairani Barocca, and or Ocker as she likes to be called, and this collection meets three of the readathon prompts, because one is to read a work of poetry, one is to read something by an Asian author, and one is to read a book that centres on an invisible disability. And Ocker is Indonesian by birth, grew up there, but has lived in like Australia, America, London. She publishes her poetry in English, though I think she does also perform in Indonesian. And she, I think, and she has like a neurological condition, so hence visible disability. And she, I think, would describe herself as an activist writer. She's certainly a disability activist, but environmental issues, anti-colonialism, they're all very much there in her work and in this collection, Ultimatum Orangutan. And I've had a kind of an initial look at the collection and picked one to share with you. And it came out in 2021. It came to my attention because it was on the shortlist for the Barbellion Prize. She's a poet who is passionate and, yes, an activist, but I would say she's got a strong poetic voice as well as a strong political voice. So, and this poem is called How to Avoid Oneself as a Vulnerable Person in a Pandemic. And I think it's typical of her work in that it's a poem you could read on several levels. There's several kind of layers to this poem. And on one level, it's quite funny. It's also quite angry. It's sparked off by her seeing a sign in a lift. And that sign says, and then this is like kind of quoted at the beginning of the poem, avoid vulnerable people such as the elderly or chronically ill as much as possible. And a sign in my apartment building, she says, in the lift in March 2020. And what does that do? That says, we, the people sticking up this sign, we're going to assume that the people reading this, the norm for people reading this sign is people who aren't disabled, who aren't elderly or chronically ill, that you're the other, and this is a sign for the majority. And I think it's that thing about not being seen, or like that if you're disabled, you might, as a disabled person, you might only become visible when it's about your extra needs, as it were. So here's the poem. How to avoid oneself as a vulnerable person in a pandemic. Avoid vulnerable people, such as the elderly or chronically ill, as much as possible. A sign in my apartment building's lift, March 2020. To the detriment of your calculated chances of survival in numerical statistics. but not to the detriment of your chances of survival in any known parameter of soul. I'm always here, cutting the hollow out from your void, severing the colonized parts of your mind from true self, separating these abundant, malevolent jinn from your fears, engorging you with your air-like, soul-body proud, malignant to death indispensability. Your set task of avoidance is null. Your canines triumphant, ride or die. And I feel that Ocker is saying, I'm not going to be constrained. I'm going to, ride, live my life regardless. So happy Poetry Thursday, and do think about getting involved in the Disability Readathon. I will link to the hosts' announcement videos below, and I think also the Instagram link if I can, but they're well organised. If you go to their announcement videos, you get the whole package.